Okay. Hello and welcome everyone. Today is Tuesday, November 29th, 2022, and this is a study session of the Governing Board of the Litchfield Elementary School District. This study session is hereby called to order. Our first item on the agenda is item 1B, Certified Staff Liquidated Damages Discussion and Presentation, which will be presented by Ms. McLennan and Ms. O'Brien, our legal counsel.
Good evening, President Moran and governing board members. I'm actually sitting in for Director Reichs today. She's out, not feeling well, and so I was just going to get this part kicked off for our guests. So some historical information based off of our certified contract releases. You can say the slide has been updated since you saw it in September. The last reason category, signed contract. So at the very end, signed contract and resigned well before the start of the new school year. This group was not originally included in the September data. So you can see in the two columns, we have the 21-22 and the 22-23 school year, the reasons for the release of contracts between the 2 years. As you can see, the majority of our releases had to do with either family or employee health, a promotion, or relocation. There were 2 each year that were a change in career, which were reported to the ADE.
Good evening, everyone. Question on that slide, previous slide, the updated one. Those updated numbers, the 8, is that included in the totals above there?
No.
Okay, that's a separate category.
That is a separate category now. Yes.
So these people had never been paid?
Had never been paid. They did not start the year.
Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the governing board. This is Jennifer McLennan. I'm with Gus Rosenfeld. I'm also here with my partner, Carrie O'Brien. Carrie's going to be taking over the legal services for the board beginning in January 1. So we are welcome, and I thank you for your time and attention these many years. Tonight, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about the contract law that exists behind a potential liquidated damages clause. Currently, the school district does not have a liquidated damages clause in your existing contracts. A clause such as this is really a matter of contract. So it's a part of the promises that the individual agrees to as a part of signing the employment contract with the district. It's a risk allocation provision. So what it says is that a breaching party pays a predetermined fixed amount to the non-breaching party. And that's how a liquidated damages clause exists. In my experience, typically liquidated damages that are charged are between $1,500 to $3,000. I have heard of some school districts basing it on, sort of an odd formula. For instance, Littleton does that. But most of the time it's a predetermined amount stated in the contract. I would say almost 80% of the time, the amount is $2,500. You can have a liquidated damages clause that is graduated. So for instance, that you would owe more monies as the year goes on. And any liquidated damage clause should include language that it's not a penalty. So the purpose of it is meant to assist the district in recouping costs for the breach of the contract. The actual contract language has to include that the employee gives permission to the district to withhold amounts from any pay owing. So that is the employee's signature on the written contract constitutes their authorization under IRS law and state law to permit the withholding of funds, because typically you cannot withhold someone's pay without the written permission. So that's a part of the liquidated damages clause typically. Carrie, do you want to talk about waiving liquidated damages a little bit?
Hi, my name is Carrie O'Brien from Gus Rosenfeld.
school districts are able to waive liquidated damages. Some districts have a criteria that they allow administrators to use to determine what circumstances would allow for waiver. So for example, if a spouse is moving to another state, that might be a legitimate reason that the administration would recommend waiver of liquidated damages. The best practice would be, again, for the board to approve those reasons for waiver of liquidated damages. And the typical reasons are moving out of state, medical need, or promotion perhaps to another district in a different capacity. For example, from a teacher to an administrator.
So the procedures of the process for collecting the liquidated damages is, again, what typically happens is that you withhold the funds from the employee due and owing. But as Sarah mentioned earlier, some of the individuals that were listed on that never worked for your district, right? So you don't owe them money, and so you don't have that collection pot to get from. So you can have a legal collections process server, or you take them to small claims court. I have not personally had clients that have done that. They've just sort of tried to chase it with letters. And sometimes you get somewhere and sometimes you don't. I have certainly seen school districts put employees or applicants on like a payment plan and gather money from them that way. So those are some of the basics of liquidated damages. Carrie and I did bring some sample language that we could share with you if you'd like us to. One is a graduated amount and one is not. So that would be, a starting point. I can tell you that Carrie and I review, do you want to go ahead and pass them out, Carrie? Carrie and I review numerous contracts every school year, and you all are in the minority in terms of not having a liquidated damages clause. The only other school districts that I know of that really don't are ones with MOUs with their employee organizations. Most of them do not. One school district that I represent has sort of an interesting idea. They take any money that they garner through liquidated damages and they put it in a pot, and that is the money used to do employee celebrations. And they tell their employees, we're paying for your potluck, we're paying for the food truck with money that we've obtained through liquidated damages. And then I will also tell you, just, I did note on the one slide that ADE, you all have reported to ADE at the last ASPA conference I attended a few weeks ago. ADE certification unit was there. And I understand that, and it's not direct information, but through another client, that, making the report that someone has breached their contract to ADE, typically, I always thought it kind of goes in a big black hole and nobody does anything about it. But what they've indicated was that if the employee pays the liquidated damages, ADE does not pursue anything with regard to their certification. But if they do not, if they really balk and don't adhere to their contract provisions, then ADE will issue a censure letter. So, and that is, as in ADEs, that's progressive discipline as well. So those are just some, additional information that I share with the board before you start your discussion.
Thank you. Before we begin our discussion, Superintendent Gunning, will you please take a photo of this document that was sent out and send a text to Mr. Honak so that he can have the same information? Okay, Mr. Honak, you should receive a text from Ms. Potapov or an email with this document that was just distributed to the board. Mr. Honak, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand.
Okay, so I can't just unmute myself and talk?
No, I believe not, based on the changes that we've made. Is that correct, IT folks? You can raise your hand on Zoom and you will be given the floor. Yes, that is correct. Do you know how to utilize the raise hand function?
I do, but I can't access it right now because the chat is on the screen. I'm trying to get rid of that.
Okay. Well, you have the floor now, so if you would have a question you'd like to ask, feel free.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you. If you have a question to ask, please do, feel free.
Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you said I had to raise my hand before I talked. So
Well,
I
right now
didn't.
you already have the floor, so I'm allowing you to speak.
Okay, yeah, I know. I don't have any questions. I'm fine.
Great, then I will open the floor to any board members who have questions.
I do. I have a question. Explain the process for developing the criteria that the board would use to approve and or deny these charges. For example, is that something, right? And the policy is going to have specific language, but then when it comes before us, we have either in our own policies or a regulation or something like that that we would then follow? Or I mean, I can't imagine all of that is in the contract. So how does that work from a protocol perspective here as board members change, things like that? How do we make sure that stays consistent?
Madam President, Ms. Clymer, the typical methodology is to just include the liquidated damages clause in a contract, not to include it in policy. I have seen it rarely in other school districts' policies, but typically it's just something approved in the contract. On an annual basis, this board approves the form of contract every year. That's typically done in the spring. And so you would ask direct counsel to include that in your contracts. We would include language similar to what was distributed, probably the second version. And then the board, once adopted, would have an action item where you would specify the reasons, have a discussion, and at a public meeting, adopt the reasons by which you would waive the liquidated damages provision. And then the staff would implement the board's direction on that. So for instance, if you were going to implement the waiver for the three most common reasons, and you should implement waivers for anyone who requests a medical leave of absence, especially for themselves, as that is an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that would be our recommendation. But so you would approve a medical release, you would approve a moving out of state, you would approve a promotion, and you would define what those things mean. So for instance, moving from a certified teaching position to another certified teaching position in another district where you're making more money isn't a promotion, it's a lateral move, even if you're making more money in that other district. So.
Okay, it seems like there could be some gray area there in specific instances, even ones that we've had this year in terms of contract releases. So I'm just wondering if those don't come back to the board, how we would state that all ahead of time, because we wouldn't know those specific details of a situation, right, until they come up. Does that make sense?
It does. So what has happened in the past with that situation is that in other districts, again, because you all have not had these provisions, the district administration will uniformly apply the rules. And if an employee is denied a waiver, they can come and speak at public comment and say, please grant me a waiver, and the board could ask that be put on a future agenda item to consider if you wanted to have it considered. Again, the whole purpose in defining the circumstances would be so that there isn't any concerns, in terms of, a medical release requires a physician's note. So that should be pretty cut and dry. Move out of state would be documented with the offer letter or what all. And the final one, the promotion would be documented as well with the offer letter. So it does not, in my experience, does not garner itself to that many issues. It's just the heartstrings issues where people come in and say, I'm sorry, I have to resign. These are the reasons, and they're not on that list, right? So.
Right. Yeah, I totally understand that. And that's something that we would have to deal with. I'm more worried about people that basically abandon their contract prior to the school board releasing them. And we've had that happen, right? They just stop coming and they're released. And then it's sort of after the fact that, we would be able to make that decision because they've, the approval of the governing board comes after the fact that they've already been quote unquote released by the district because they've stopped coming or they've moved or they've gotten promoted or whatever. And so I guess that's what I'm wondering is sometimes the timing just doesn't work out that we know ahead of time, but those are individual circumstances. We can work through that. One question I have for you, and this happened to us recently, we're on the flip side of it, is rather than liquidated damages, if someone was getting a promotion specifically to another district, rather than, or could we offer them a choice of either paying the damages per the clause in the contract and or waiting until we replace their position?
So my recommendation, and that it's a good question. My recommendation would be that if you can do both. It's still
Mhm.
breach of contract, even if you wait. You can ask employees to remain until their position is filled.
Okay.
But whether they do or not is not within your control. So, and then you come up with the scenario that you've said, which is they abandon their job. And so what do you do about that? Carrie and I have both created statements of charges to discipline employees and go through the same process that this board went through recently, where you adopt a statement of charges and the individual can request a hearing. I've never had anyone request a hearing when we've done that, but we have done that for people who have just stopped showing up. But the more typical process is that the board will recommend the approval of the resignation and move on, either report them to ADE for unprofessional conduct or not. Whatever you do, you should be uniform about it. So if you're going to require somebody to try to remain until their job is filled, you shouldn't do that for everybody. My experience is that's not any more successful than any other tactic that you all try, so it's just an epidemic of resignations. So
Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of promotions, I think it is probably, I'm going to hope that it would have a higher success rate in that if we're hiring someone for a better job than they're coming from and they're not releasing their contract, we can't hire them if they're under a contract with someone else. So I would assume the same would apply in reverse, right? And if we don't release them from their contract, they would have to break the contract, which would give us every opportunity to pursue what you just said versus staying in. I mean, we wouldn't want to hire someone who was basically violating another contract. I can't imagine we would do that. So, right?
again, this is a different environment this year than in years past, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Most school districts, if there is my experience is that most school districts, if we're talking about a true promotion, they work with the individual because they will allow the person to break the contract mid-year. They will allow that individual to move. I have had certain circumstances where the new district will actually pay the liquidated damages to the old district. So I've seen that happen, rare, but as a part, like a signing bonus, they'll issue a signing bonus so that they're covered. But many administrators do move mid-year and they do pay to do that.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Dr. Dowling, do you have any questions?
Of course. On the graduated liquidated damages, why, I don't understand why you're even bothering with the June the 1st to June the 15th. Why bother?
Dr. Dowling, Madam President, that is one of our clients, and I don't know why that exactly was negotiated or why it wasn't in reverse, that you're charging more earlier and less as the year goes on, but that's the agreement they made. And when I have seen the graduated amounts, I have seen them smaller in the front end if they breach like before school starts, and more money if they breach during the school year. And I think the logic is that it is really difficult to take care of kids when somebody leaves their contract, in the middle of the semester.
Yeah, I would suggest you just make it a flat from June 1st to July 31st. How many days are in July? 3. Is that right? To the end of July, there you go. It'd be a flat $1,000, and anything after would be $2,000. But anyway, my second question is, in the second, the flat rate liquidated damages, I understand that the part here, you may waive the payment if the employee's non-performance results from a circumstances beyond his or her control, or from an agreement for a resignation in lieu of dismissal. Those are those are two entirely different reasons. I mean, entirely different. Termination, well, I'm not saying, let's say they choose to resign. Somebody's ill, they have to leave the state to take care of elderly parents perhaps. And the second one, they're resigning in lieu of dismissal. In other words, we've got something going on here and they're going to resign in lieu of dismissal. I don't see how one of them would relate to the other.
I agree with you. I don't think those two relates. I think they're two separate reasons why you could waive under that draft paragraph.
And then one more question. If a person is on administrative leave and getting paid during some kind of an investigation, and that person is fired, terminated after collecting a large portion of their contract and resulting in perhaps substitute teachers involved at the rate of pay. I don't think $2,000 or $2,500 is enough. To be
Madam
honest,
President, Dr. Dowling.
because they haven't done anything. They haven't worked.
Right. My understanding, and I heard this again at the ASPA conference, but there was a study done with ASU about the actual cost of, what it would cost when you lose a teacher, and it is far above the $2,500. I don't remember the figure.
Absolutely.
But I think your point is well taken, that the amount, whether it's 2,500 or even up, I have not seen any higher than 4, but even 4 or 5 would not cover the actual cost to the district.
Board Member Saitama, do you have any questions?
I'd actually like some clarification based on what Dr. Dowling was just saying. So this is if they decide to break their contract, but if we let go of somebody, would this not apply to them then?
If you let go of somebody, it would not apply to them
So
typically.
in the situation where somebody was on paid leave while we were doing an investigation or whatever, and then ended up getting let go, this would not, like, we wouldn't get money back from them anyways.
Madam President, Ms. Zudiment, that's exactly right.
Okay.
And the reason for that generally is because during that negotiation, would typically agree to waive that in order to get the resignation and move the employee on.
Board Member Honak, do you have any questions?
Sorry, you got to get the mouse off the document and over to the mute thing to push it. No, I don't. My only question was that why we're talking about this, but I think I know it because we've had a lot of people leave, and there should be some some consequences at least. So I'm imagining that's exactly what it is. I don't need an explanation unless I'm totally wrong. And I think it is necessary and other people have it. And probably having a high figure wouldn't make any difference because probably a lot of time you're not going to collect it anyway. It's just something that our honorable people will pay attention to. And if I'm wrong, please somebody say that. Thank you.
No, I believe your understanding is accurate, Board Member Honak. Superintendent Gunning, are you looking for specific feedback on the board's potential favorability of this clause being added to our contract, or what's the goal of this discussion other than just information for us at this time?
Correct. We're getting close to the contract time and talking about language on the contract and having legal counsel review our contract language. So we would need to kind of just get guidance on if that's something you want us to bring back, of having the option in a future board meeting to see if that's the route we want to move forward. I do have a clarifying question though, is in a district where there are liquidated damages, and let's just say I'm going to XYZ, I'm a teacher, I want to go to XYZ district as a teacher, I pay my liquidated damages, am I allowed to then just leave?
So, Madam President, Ms. Gunning, typically, if a school district adopts the liquidated damages provision, it's again, that contract issue, not a penalty, meant to anticipate part of the cost of the breach. So it doesn't prevent the breach, which is your question. Most school districts that have the liquidated damages, some will still say you need to stay until you are replaced, then you can go, but you would still need to pay the liquidated damages because we incurred costs in recruiting for you. So it's not an automatic get out of jail free card, but it does allow for there to be some contractual compensation if they do breach. So again, if a teacher breaches, there's basically 3 things you can do. There's one is to recommend, that administration can recommend that you not accept the resignation and report the teacher to ADE. That's one option. The administration can recommend that you accept the resignation and then charge the liquidated damages. And that's typically what's done when you have a liquidated damages clause. And then the third is to say that the teacher has to keep coming to work. And if they refuse to come to work, and I shouldn't just pick on teachers, it could be psychologists, your speech language paths, your nurses. If we put it in one, we put it in everybody's. So the employee could fail to come to their job, and then you would choose to prosecute them for job abandonment. So that's kind of the 3 methodologies of actually breaking the contract. So does that answer?
Yeah. Okay. So that's something to ponder because we are seeing other districts compensate them for their liquidated damages, both public and private, in their signing bonuses or upping the compensation. So that is becoming more common practice than we've ever seen in the past.
Okay, so I guess I would like to go through and hear from each board member the answer to 3 questions. The first question is liquidated damages something you would like to see potentially in our contracts for next year? If so, what would your proposed dollar amount be? That's the second question. The third question is, would you like to see a stay until filled clause added as well? So liquidated damages, yes or no? If yes, dollar amount and stay until filled clause. Dr. Dowling?
Yes, I'd like to see some kind of liquidated damages, and I would recommend 1,000, 2,000. Based on the date, as indicated here, the 1,000 would be June 1st to the end of July. After that point in time, it'd be $2,000. And what was the last part?
Would you like to see a clause that we request people stay until their position is filled? And that would be on top of the liquid damages, I think.
So the board would have already approved them leaving, because they can't, if it's a promotion, they can't go to another district until they're no longer contracted here. So,
That's how it's supposed to go, yes.
yeah. Well, it should go that way, correct? So
I think a common scenario would be, let's say we have a principal who is getting a promotion to assistant superintendent somewhere. Do we ask that principal to stay with our district until we have a new principal coming in, or do we release them from their contract?
no, I would not release them from the contract. We need to get somebody else on board and then that person would be released from the contract. Then the question would be, is that liquidated damages included in there or not?
I think it would be both. It would be you pay liquidated damages and you stay. Now, again,
Understand?
as we were told, that doesn't mean they're going to show up. They could still abandon their job, but at least set the expectation is that we want you to stay until your replacement has been hired or starts, and pay the liquidated damages.
Yeah, but this is hypothetical. The school district in which they're going to may tell them, you can't be here right now. This is a promotion. You've already resigned. It's been approved by the board. Your hiring has been approved by our district. This could go open up a can of worms, just like a domino effect. That it may never happen. I'm not sure. I'm sure it has happened, but I would say yes, the person would have to stay to answer the question.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Clymer.
I'll try to answer quickly. Yes, I'm in favor of adding this to our contract. I would like to see the 2,500. I'm open to hearing sort of, I guess, graduated. I think the bulk of our problem seems to be people never start here. So I mean, in terms of finding a solution to our actual business problem, I'm not sure that the cost really even matters, because if we're not going to be able to recoup the cost from those people, it's kind of a moot point. So I'm not even sure the graduated makes sense, but I'd like to see a higher amount, $2,500. That's from what Director Reichs told us a couple of meetings ago. That's potentially a quarter of the cost it takes for us to replace that employee. So to me, staying within the average of our peer districts, but still doing something that is, I think, enough to warrant giving people having a double take or a second look at, is it really worth leaving? And if the other district is willing to pay it, by all means. I mean, at least we're somewhat compensated for that. In terms of the third option, yes, I think in the case of promotions, we should absolutely be asking people to stay. Other districts are doing it to us, and we don't have to release them from their contract. I mean, they're contracted to us, and our kids are the ones that suffer when we let them go whenever they get a promotion. And if the other district doesn't want to wait, then they don't get the promotion. That's not a negative effect on us.
Board Member Zeinaba?
Yes, I would want to see liquidated damages in the contract. I would say I'm good with the 2,500, but I'd also want some information if we could discuss like different amounts for different jobs kind of thing, like, because we have admin that gets paid this versus our teachers that get paid that. So if it's the same fee for everyone, I'm just not sure if that's necessarily fair or not, but I'm open to discussion on that. And then also, yes, I would like to ask in the case of a promotion for people to have to stay, but I still don't want to see us saying promotions are okay to waive the fee.
Board Member Honak?
I am for the graduated, something along the $1,000 up to Dr. Dowling, was that you said to July 1st, and then after that it would ramp up to the maximum? Is that what you said, the date?
I said from until the end of July was 1,000. After July, after the end of July, August the 1st on, it would be 2,000.
Okay, but school starts around the beginning of August, right? So we're really in a pinch. So anyway, it should go to the maximum. I think the maximum should be 2,500 or 3,000, and 1,000 up till whenever. But I just wonder maybe if it should be till July 15th or something, and that we'd have a little bit of time. And as far as the making whoever it is stay until we find a replacement, I'm not sure that is appropriate with the liquidated damages, because they're supposed to stay anyway. They've signed a contract until we say they can go. If they want to come to us and say, gee, I'd like to break it, then if they stay, until we get a replacement, I think still maybe we should get the liquidated damages. But I think if you connect the two, I don't think it's necessary to connect the two, because it'd be better to use our discretion. Maybe we want them to leave. Maybe we want them to stay. And so I'm not sure that should be at all connected to this, since we have the protection anyway. But as far as the liquidated damages, yes, we do need it. I think it should, if somebody, has second thoughts before long, a few weeks before school starts, be a lower amount, and then it should go high after that point.
Thank you. I am interested in adding a liquidated damages clause to our contract. I could go either way with the graduated. I mean, I think the administration and in discussions with legal, maybe you can come to the best recommendation based on what we've been seeing. The dollar amount, I agree, 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 seems reasonable to me. And I would like to see a stay until filled clause, since we have experienced that ourselves and know, what that looks like. I think that's best practice. Superintendent Gunning, do you have anything you would like us to consider before we conclude the discussion?
So the other piece would be would you want us to bring back options for waiving like the other districts have done?
Yes, I think it's imperative that we have some options for waiving. Yes.
And then I would say at the next time that when we bring this back or these options back, the other thing that I know the governing board wanted information on was just contract language in general. And that type of information, like where is there flexibility in the contract, kind of like who designs the contract, that kind of information too.
Sure. So we have worked with Litchfield for many years on your contract forms, and I certainly have met with you in executive session prior on those forms. The contract forms are developed through our office. We update them on an annual basis. Carrie O'Brien and I just went through that review this week, actually, and we're only adding one thing to the contract, which is to address the aggregate expenditure limit and make sure that if you have to reduce salaries related to that language is in there to protect you. So it's not just if you don't receive funding, but also if you receive it but can't use it. So that's really the only material change we're making this year. The contract forms follow our forms. They follow the forms that the trust, Arizona Risk Retention Trust, had approved and worked on some years ago. So there's various, provisions in them, and Ms. O'Brien and I have worked together to develop checklists to make sure that your districts, all districts that we work with, have the relevant materials. So for instance, there has to be within the body of a contract document, there's a new law that says that you can remove a non-certificated individual, someone who's on an emergency certification within 10 days. You don't have to use the statement of charges procedure. But it has to be in your contract. So we've added language like that. So Carrie will be the one reviewing your contracts. I've seen her taking copious notes on your discussion today. And so we'll have those ready whenever your administration asks.
I had one clarifying question, not related to the overall contract, but back to the criteria for waiving of liquidated damages. Of course, we will have that because we will always have, extenuating circumstances. One thing that doesn't do, this is a question, it'll come out like a statement, but it needs to be a question. One thing that waiving of those charges doesn't do is allow that individual to be released prior to the governing board approving their release. Is that correct? Whether they're waiving the damages or not, they're still a contracted employee and have to show up to work until the governing board releases them from their contract.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Ms. Clymer, that is how it should work.
Okay.
But for instance, if an employee can't show up because they're ill, they would have to request a leave, and they would be on leave until you release them from their contract. So that would be how that might work.
Correct. But in other circumstances where they physically are able to, just because we decide you don't have to do liquidated damages, you still have to go through our process and be officially released from the contract before you stop showing up.
Again,
if you're physically capable of doing that.
Again, that is the goal, is to try to encourage employees to do that. And that would be their responsibility under 15,545, which does not permit someone to breach the contract without your approval.
Okay. Thank you.
Board Member Honak, do you have any final commentary on this agenda item?
No, I think we got it all covered.
Great, then we will move on to agenda item 1C, presentation topics, liquidated damages, which I believe we've discussed, but we could have some follow-ups in that presentation. Fiscal year 2022-23 new position, ROI, superintendent position, and fiscal year 23-24 employee benefits, and the fiscal year 23-24 compensation planning timeline. This will be presented by Superintendent Gunning, Executive Director Vaughn, and Ms. Lewis.
Are we switching out the slides?
As we're getting that ready, I just want to give a friendly reminder to everyone to please speak directly into your microphones. Thank you.
All right, Madam President, members of the governing board, I've already kind of given the introduction, but if we could, I don't have the clicker. Okay. So as you shared, those are the agenda items we'll talk about. We already discussed liquidated damages. We will discuss some of the work that we plan to do around ROI for the positions that were added in the current school year. The superintendent position, as well as employee benefits, and we'll provide a high-level compensation planning timeline for the budget process for next year. All right. So for 22-23 school year, the district added several new positions at the direction of the governing board. The positions included classroom aides in certain grades and on-staff substitutes at each school. Tonight, we'll talk at a high level about some of the data we plan to look at to evaluate these positions for continuation and ask the governing board for feedback. As a reminder, for the current school year, we added 3 classroom aides in grades kindergarten through 3rd grade and 1 classroom aide in 6th grade. To evaluate the effectiveness of those positions, administration plans to conduct 2 surveys, one of principals to dive into how these aides were utilized at each individual school during the school year and what supports were provided, and one for teachers to determine the impact on employee burnout, classroom management, and instructional supports. We will also be looking at DIBELS and math benchmark data, fall to winter, and we'll look at how successfully these positions were filled during the year to provide context to the data collected. Based on feedback from the schools and other data related to effectiveness, we'll be able to have a much broader discussion around if it makes sense to retain these positions going forward. Similarly, we plan to conduct a principal and teacher survey related to the on-staff guest teachers to determine how all of the guest teachers were utilized and the impact on teacher burnout and perceived ability to take time off. We will also plan to look at attendance data for teachers to see if teachers actually took more time off. We are also currently running analysis to see how often the guest teachers are being utilized and how the substitute fill rate compares to last year when we did not have these positions and were solely relying on our contracted substitute firm. At this time, I will open it up for discussion around the data we plan to collect connected to these positions to get governing board feedback on if there's anything else we might like to see.
Yeah, I will start with a question. So on the contracted guest teachers, you have in here part of your data to be fill rates on the substitutes. Can we also just look at total amount paid to ESI kind of year over year? Maybe even look back at pre-COVID numbers there, because I know it has not been consistent based on the last few years.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any other board member questions or comments on these data points?
Yes, I have a question. Or comment, I guess, on both. I agree on the contracted guest teachers. It seems to be easier to me. I mean, there's more sort of very specific data in terms of their attendance, fill rates, how many classrooms didn't go empty because we had a substitute there on campus. So hopefully by budgeting time and at least at the end of this year, we'll have a fairly good idea of how that data comes together. So I'm on board with that, and I think that we can review that. In terms of the instructional aides, I think that we need to look at this in terms of 2 objectives. From my memory, I know this was a year ago now that we kind of started to have this conversation about how we can utilize the extra funds and more specifically, how we can reduce teacher burnout, stress, and some of the other responsibilities that they had that were continuing to grow. So I look at here as sort of two objectives. One is sort of job satisfaction for teachers. Were we able to reduce the stress? Were we able to reduce their workload and increase their bandwidth and that kind of thing? And sort of the second, not even second tier, but an equally important objective is, do they have an impact on student success? And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to know that by budgeting time in March, February. So my request would be to continue to gather this data, whether it be assessment or direct observation from principals and other staff, teachers, et cetera, and also clearly the student data that we won't have really at that point, at least all of it, to do this over a series of 2 to 3 years. Now, I realize that the number of aides may fluctuate slightly school to school, grade to grade, as our budget allows. I think it's premature to say that we are going to do a complete ROI analysis in 7 months for a program that could be extremely effective, but it might take 2 to 3 school years to prove out. I think we could probably find out fairly quickly on the job satisfaction teacher burnout objective, because I think we can interview our employees, we can talk to principals, see what's going on their campus specifically, and we have our employee satisfaction surveys that we do every year. So I'm not in favor of this at all. I think it's great, and we probably could add some additional intangible things to this to monitor. I just think we're being a little premature to say that we need to know the answer to this question in February. I don't think we're going to do that. And I think we're going to need to let this roll for at least another year, potentially 2 years, to really get a look at data in terms of student success and retention rates and things like that amongst teachers and classified staff to actually see if this is successful or not.
If I could add to that, I think from the like test score standpoint, these instructional aids are not being used the same on every campus. We've seen that from the campuses that we've gone to. So I know, for example, I believe it was Barbara Roby, they're being specifically utilized for small group with students. So we should be able to see some improvement there, but this is not the only change we've made. So how do we isolate that to know, yes, this is what did the trick, for those schools. So I think that's challenging, although if we're moving in the right direction, then hopefully that would be a support for this as well.
Correct. I think you're going to see that in a lot of the ESSER grant also related items, right? You've added a lot of supports as a governing board from a grant perspective, as well as just from a budget perspective. And so I think it will be difficult to say that this is the one magic piece. That's why we wanted to add in that kind of quantitative data from a survey perspective, because I think a lot of these positions, especially these in particular, it's going to be that feeling component, right? That feeling of support, that feeling of change of, I have the support, so I don't have the burnout that I had before. So I think that's where it's going to be important. But what we wanted to do, knowing as we were going into the budget timeframe that you'll have those discussions, but we wanted you to have something tangible in your hand, whether it be that, I don't know, maybe it comes back that the surveys say, no, we don't, we haven't seen any difference. So at least you have that as you're going into budget season, or yes, these are things that we really value and we support, and we would appreciate your continued support, and we'd like to monitor it over several years. So, but yeah, I think it's going to be hard. But I'm hoping that with our fall to winter data, I would hope that we would start to see definitely some gains in those arenas.
And when do we participate or anticipate conducting these surveys for feedback?
So we wanted to meet with you tonight so that we could kind of get a gauge. So I would, our goal would be able to bring those surveys back as we start the discussions for budget time, which usually we start those discussions, I believe, at the end of January to the beginning of February. So we'd want to collect that data either in that December timeframe or no later than the middle of January.
Okay, Dr. Dowling, do you have any questions on the ROI or new positions?
Yeah, the only, comment, it's not really a question, I don't think, but that survey has to be very specific. It's going to be tricky because you need you need true feedback that will tell us exactly what, if this direction that we're going to proceed in, and it may take 2 to 3 years if we proceed in this direction, what money involved, et cetera. We really have to find out just the feeling of is this working? Is it helping me personally, professionally? Those kind of things, because I was reading an article the other day, I think it was Phoenix Union, had was it a psychologist? I think it was worked in their districts, in a district to help teachers talk about and how they feel about burnout. And it was interesting, very interesting. And we really need to be careful how we word the survey. There will be some teachers who do not, we're talking specifically about the instructional assistants that we're talking about.
Yes, and the contract.
It may not impact them, or they may have an instructional assistant, but they may have a special needs student who has a one-on-one in the classroom. Are you talking about that particular situation? Are you talking about the aide that goes around and helps those kids who who aren't quite there yet versus the kids who are there and need enrichment instead of remedial? So you can get it, but you have to constantly look at the value for the dollar of what we're doing. I'm a firm believer that we need all the help in the classroom that we can possibly get based on the budgetary restrictions that we have. With that, I like the primary grade dibbles and math benchmark data as quickly as we can to see exactly where those kids are as they are, constantly, of course, we're constantly doing the formative assessments to inform instruction. And then you have to look at those benchmarks, frequent benchmarks, and, no more than 3 weeks out, constantly to see where we are in relationship to where we want to be. But based on that, if that was a lot I just said in about 3 or 4 minutes, but hopefully that helps.
Thank you. Board Member Clymer, anything else to add on this section?
No, thank you.
Board Member Zanimo?
I think that I would be interested in seeing the data broken down by campus because of the fact that we have had, like, different campuses have used the instructional aids in different ways. So seeing how kids grew in one campus versus another, we might see that the campus that had them do small groups, that was really the most effective way to utilize those instructional aids. So I think that would be good information to have.
I agree. I think that that's one of the primary objectives of also surveying the principals, to dig into how they were structured and utilized on those individual campuses.
Excellent. Board Member Honak, do you have any questions or comments on this section, the ROI section on new positions?
I just, in terms of the survey is very important, but is there any other way to determine by some objective metrics what you're trying to find out shouldn't be just found out with a survey of opinions, but if there's another way, maybe there isn't, but it sounds like if there was some other objective thing or looking into a possibility of that, it may not be possible, but that's my only comment.
Thank you. Yes, I believe the data, the student achievement data would be a non-subjective data point, but to Board Member Clymer's point earlier, that really isn't, we need a longer period of time for that data point to be validated.
One thing
Well, I'm not limiting it to academic. I'm sorry. I just want to clarify my comment. It's you're putting it in the academic pigeonhole, but in terms of efficiency and making people happy and not burnt out and things like that, if there's other, maybe looking at some other experiences with other districts or something other than just looking inside our situation, getting opinions.
Yeah, one thing I would offer to that suggestion, Board Member Honak, I agree, having some sort of like actual tangible data, potentially our teacher retention rates at specific schools with additional aides or additional supports. You know, I mean, I know we have a good retention rate overall, but if we start to see teachers leaving and things like that in a campus or a small area, that could potentially be a hard data point that we could look at to say, is burnout less or more on certain campuses potentially?
I think we'll definitely be looking at retention rate. I mean, obviously, it's part of Superintendent Gunning's goals. I think the challenging part of it, to which we've already discussed, is pinpointing that change to any individual additional support we've provided. That being said, the surveys could help direct our attention to what might be most effective in that area.
Okay, Executive Director Vaughn, I think we're ready to move on to our next section.
Madam President, members of the governing board, I never thought I would be standing here in front of you today to talk about my position. So tonight we wanted to have a discussion to discuss the future of my position. As you're aware, at the end of the 23-24 school year, I will retire as superintendent. So we would like to have a discussion to get some input towards the direction you would like us to potentially move towards. Timeline ideas in finding a search firm, if that's something that's of interest, and the transition. Is it something that you're interested in looking for a position to begin next year, or is it something that you're looking for the position to begin in the 24-25 school year? So those are all items to begin discussing.
I will open the floor for discussion. Board Member Zaidama?
Okay, that was a lot of questions, but initially my thought is that I think that we should look at hiring a search firm potentially. I think that would be the best way to utilize our time and to have other people kind of bring candidates forward to us. I'm not sure on what I think as far as hiring a new person, like hiring them starting next year or the year after, because I guess it kind of depends on what we're looking for as the next superintendent. So I'm still pondering that one.
Okay, do you want to provide any additional feedback on what you might be looking for specifically in a new superintendent? And if you want me to come back to you, I
Yeah,
will.
come back to me on
Okay.
that one.
Board Member Honak, would you like to provide some feedback at this time?
Yes, thank you. First off, I think that the board has really one employee, and that is the superintendent. Everything else with the school district is at an arm's length that is done through the administration of the superintendent. The reason I bring that up is because if we're looking for a new superintendent after Superintendent Gunning retires or at some other time, that is the one process that we should be doing ourselves. We shouldn't be looking to the Superintendent Gunning to be in charge of finding her replacement. And because there will be kind of an implied bias already into it. And, you know, unless we want a clone of Superintendent Gunning, then it would be fine. But if we want to go in another direction, like let's say, you know, doing some dramatic changes in the quest for higher academics or a lot of other values that are equally important as academics, then I think that what Ms. Zeidema said is that, you know, we really as a board need to maybe, you know, maybe we need to meet in an executive session and really just hammer out what exactly, you know, what we can agree upon. And then a plan on implementing it. There are headhunters all around. They work on all different bases. Some of them will do a lot of work for you for free before you even sign a contract. With the condition that if they do find somebody you like, then you are going to be agreeing. But it's a non-binding agreement. So I think those are the two important points. I mean, I agree with Ms. Zeidema that we really need to find common ground on what we're looking for exactly, precisely. And then we as a board, I believe legally we have the authority to make an arrangement with an organization that would help us find that person. And we should do so as a board, not through Superintendent Gunning.
And Board Member Honak, thank you so much for clarifying. I would not be involved in this process. This is not my process. This is the governing board's process. So thank you for clarifying that. So whatever the board decides, it would be the board participating in the process. I would not be a part of that process. I could answer questions if you had questions about something, but you would decide as a governing board if you're hiring a search firm, if you're not hiring a search firm, what the time frame would be for hiring. You would be the one that would make the final selection as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the first question that we really need to answer here is the timing of the position. And I know that the four of us here in person did speak about this during our retreat. Remember, Honak, you were not present for that. But I think that's probably the first thing that we need to determine, because determining that will then go into determining the timeline. And also, as you're commenting, I'd be happy to hear anyone who's interested in doing a search firm. I personally am interested in that. I am not a headhunter or an HR person, so I think that would be a very valuable resource for us to utilize. So again, kind of to start this conversation over maybe a little bit is the timing. And I will speak, I guess, regarding this time frame. So I personally would like to see us hire a superintendent to be in place for the 23-24 school year. And that would provide 1 year of overlap for like a planning superintendent, if you will. I think it will depend on the qualifications that we are asking for and the candidates that we receive and who we end up hiring, what that will look like. We have some options. You obviously can't have two superintendents, two people actually in charge at the same time. So would the new superintendent be given 6 months to transition, get to know our processes and that sort of thing, and then kind of take over the reins? And then at that point, Superintendent Gunning would do some special projects or things like that. As you are likely aware, the board, we are under contractual obligation to Superintendent Gunning until the end of the 23-24 school year. So she will be getting paid regardless. But I personally would like to see a year overlap there. I don't think we would be successful in finding someone to just come in for half a year. But as we know, traditionally we have run very lean. And I think having that additional time will make for a smoother transition.
I don't want to hog the floor, but I think I could answer that if I could a little bit. I agree. I think essentially there's nothing saying that we shouldn't start searching now. By now, I mean let's plan an executive session, maybe even a short one soon to do some parameters. But this isn't a position where somebody, it's not like a normal position. It's a life change for somebody. And we may be, we may be finding somebody that really wants that you're looking right now, but they're not planning on moving for a year or two. So I'm not sure that we need the overlap. I think that we could have the overlap by not having to pay them, but by starting the search early and really finding somebody that has a really proven track record. They've maybe done really well in the area that we're looking for, and but they're not ready to leave. So I mean, I think this is the way companies do it. I mean, a lot of times it's not just like go find somebody that's looking for a job. So I think that I agree with you, President Moran. I think it's something that we could start doing very soon, and we're not even gonna maybe find anybody for 6 months or 9 months, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be starting the process, because again, I'm repeating myself, but I don't think it's a position that you're just finding an interchangeable person. We're looking for a unique person, and we're going to need to do some searching to go find that. We're probably going to go look around and find a school district doing everything that we would dream that we would like ours to. And then we have to figure out a way to, bribe them or coerce them and woo them and court them to want to come here. So it could be a very long process, but one that maybe we could start sooner rather than later.
Okay, just for a point of clarification, we don't need to have an executive session to discuss the job description and what our expectations are for the superintendent. I believe we will have a transparent public conversation about what those expectations are once we establish the timeline. Board Member Clymer, do you have any commentary on this topic?
Yes, I'll touch on both the timeline and the interest in potentially using a search firm. In my past experience, although I've only done this once, so I wouldn't say that it's extensive experience, but I would agree that it is in the district's best interest to start this process in the spring of 2023. I realize that there are questions about overlap and timing and what that would look like and who would do what. And I think we can work together collaboratively to figure out what those are. But I think to Board Member Honak's point, we don't know when we would be able to hire someone. So if things went all according to plan, we would hire them by the end of next school year, and they would start in August or potentially over the summer. Worst case scenario, it may take longer than that. And we may need to work a lot longer to find someone that meets our criteria and we feel like would make a good fit. The longer we wait to start that process, the more potential we have to running up against our real timeline, which is, when Jody's going to retire in 2024. So knowing that superintendents, like other, certified teachers and things like that, are usually contractually based and they're on school years, we kind of have to catch it at the right timing to make sure that we even have a potential to do that. So my request for the timeline would be to, start that process in January in earnest to see what we could do in the spring. I do have an interest in utilizing a search firm, I think for two different reasons. As I mentioned in my brief experience doing this before, it can get extremely difficult trying to work with 5 members of the board when anytime we are together in the same room, we have a public meeting. And so it's difficult to just go through resumes and sort of, contact people and set things up and all of that, because we can't actually have contact with each other. So it makes it very difficult. And we would need somebody either on the board or somewhere to help sort of facilitate that process, because it's nearly impossible to do that when no more than 2 of us can be in a room at the same time. Also, I think with the search firm, it gives a lot of opportunity to, I don't want to say weed out, I don't think we're going to have a million applicants, but at least do a preliminary look-see on who is applying, what they might look like, if they would be a cultural fit here, if they sort of have the same values and whatnot. And I think, any conversation that a potential candidate would be having with a member of the board or member of this district is very different than they would be having with a headhunter or search firm, right? They're going to be honest. They want this to be a good fit. They are going to do what they can, obviously, to get the job, but they also want to know what the job is really like. And those conversations happen with a search firm and a headhunter because that's what they do for a living. Anytime you're talking to us, you're in an interview situation. So it's very hard to get, I think, a lot of what we might potentially be able to get from a search firm. So I am in favor of doing that. I think one question I have for Director Vaughn in terms of procurement, if we were to potentially want to go out and do a firm, do we have to do an RFP for that? Or could we just select? I know we have a price limit, but I don't know exactly how much this costs. So what is your gut telling you on this?
I believe there are a number of firms that do this type of work that are on cooperative contracts. And so the board would have the opportunity to look at what's available there.
Okay.
The benefit of moving forward in that direction from a procurement perspective is it greatly expedites the process. So that might be a good place to start. And then if we don't like what we see from who is available on a cooperative contract, then it would probably be discussions around doing a formal RFP process of our own. As a reminder, cooperative contracts work because what it effectively means is some other district or some other government out there has already done the RFP process, and they've awarded either to one vendor or numerous vendors, and have just made that procurement available for other governments to piggyback off of, if you will, so
Okay.
that administrative work doesn't have to be redone. But based on what I'm hearing from the board around the timeline of when you'd like to get started, I think the cooperative contract route makes sense from the expedience perspective, so long as the board can find a search firm candidate in that realm that has a cooperative contract awarded.
And how would that work exactly? We're sitting here today, basically December 1st. Do you have a listing of those firms or something that, something that you could provide the board with? Okay, here are your 5 options we could review. And then at the next meeting, say, discuss, sort of decide if we wanted to move forward with one candidate and then see how that process plays out. Is that what you would recommend?
So the governing board each year approves the district as being members of various cooperatives. And so how that works from a nitty-gritty administrative perspective, if you will, is if we want to purchase something, we then go to our purchasing department, and each of those cooperatives have lists and databases that the purchasing team can search to identify relevant applicable contracts. So we certainly could have the purchasing team start that search, if you will, of what cooperative contracts are available to us, and then provide that information to the board.
Okay. Depending on how this conversation shakes out with the rest of us, I would request that as a board, we make a request just to at least start that process to get us a list. I'm imagining that we'll have to go through, come through a little bit of information before we make that decision at an upcoming meeting.
Before we potentially ask for that to be put on a future agenda, Dr. Dowling, I'm interested in your input on this.
Yeah, if you're looking at rank ordering those 4 things you have up there, definitely you have to come up with when do you want that person to start? That's number 1. And I'm highly in favor of the 23-24 school year, which takes us to the timeline, which would be the second item on if you rank ordered them. Because we have to decide if that's the case, you need to start moving now. Time is of the essence. People are being hired for positions for next year all over this country, for positions such as this. Then I would recommend that, highly recommend that we have a search firm. I go back and forth on having a facilitator, which is cheaper because it's usually 1 or 2 people versus a search firm. But And then with that, you may want to consider going out with an RFP because there's templates all over it. And then also at the same time, look at your co-op. Because if you're not happy with the co-op contractors, then you're behind the 8 ball, but then now we got to do an RFP. I would probably recommend you do an RFP immediately and then also look deeply into who's on the co-op list of headhunters, so to speak. And at some point, you've got to have all stakeholder input. And you need to do that quickly also. Unfortunately, our superintendent's leaving in a year and a half. What would you like to see in the next superintendent? And we have to, community members, teachers, support staff, administrative staff, something that would tell us this is what we would like to see as a community. And in the transition, it'd be very simple. That person would start at the beginning of the school year of 23-24 with Jody right by that person's side. But we have to be very clear who's in charge. That's going to be tricky. I think Jody can navigate that. She's very astute and very intelligent. She knows this school district inside and out. I'm sure she will let everybody know on certain terms that the new person comes in. Don't go around that new person, so to speak. Anyway, that being said, time's of the essence. It's critical, absolutely critical. And getting somebody on board to help you facilitate. Some school districts will try to do this by themselves. I don't recommend it. I recommend at a minimum a facilitator, Sherpa, as I like to refer to him, a guide who can take you through the process.
Thank you, Dr. Dowling. I think based on the feedback that has been given so far, what I would like to see happen is we come back for a discussion at our December board meeting and we discuss the specifics of the job description, because that has changed, I believe, since Superintendent Gunning was hired. We now have the deputy superintendent. We have some other positions that weren't in existence at that point in time. So there will at least need to be some technical updates to that. I agree with what you said, Dr. Dowling, as far as we need to have all stakeholders be involved in the hiring process of who is the best candidate. But I believe as a board, we can do the job description piece ourselves, and we can then bring the public and the stakeholders in that hiring process. So what my question now is, and this might be, I don't know if the administration can answer this, if our legal counsel can answer this, or if other board members have thoughts on this, is how we then go about executing this. Meaning, do we need to create a committee that meets either in conjunction with our meetings or on a separate time frame once a month, however often that needs to be, to make this happen? Or do we want to add this to our regular board meetings and give updates in that respect? Of course, if we added a committee, we would then have to agendize that and it would be open to the public and all of that sort of thing. But Jennifer McLennan, do you have some feedback on that, what people normally do?
Madam President, members of the governing board, if the decision is to hire a search firm, then the search firm will essentially be bringing information on a periodic basis to the governing board regarding updates, regarding applicants, regarding the process, what they've received, where they looked, that type of thing. So and you are absolutely correct that if you do form a committee to search for the superintendent, that committee is subject to open meeting law. Certainly, if it's the board's goal to get community input on any candidate that you choose, you would have the opportunity to do that through once you narrow down to 3 is the typical number, you would get input through community forums and presentations and that sort of thing.
Okay, I guess I want to clarify in that Yeah, by saying forming a committee, I was not insinuating that we would be performing the search ourselves, but I was just trying to get to, in practicality, when do we receive that feedback? So we would receive that feedback from the search firm during our regular meetings, or we would need a special meeting for that, or how is that normally done?
Madam President, members of the governing board, however you want it to be done. So you can definitely get feedback during the regular board meetings. Some of the feedback can be conducted in an executive session when you're, for instance, reviewing applications and provided some direction through the employment law process. But most search firms are pretty astute at trying to make sure that they give feedback to you on a regular basis. A lot of times when you get down to the applications have come in and they've been vetted and the reference checks have been done and you're actually looking at selecting, you would hold a study session or a special meeting to do that.
Okay, do any
could-
board members have feedback on that? What that process will look like or should look like?
If I could offer,
Go ahead, Board Member Rona.
okay, I've actually been through this process quite a few times. I've done it the normal way that for many years I did it sort of the normal way and trying to do it, and then in the last 10 or so years of my business, I had a headhunter and developed a very close relationship with the headhunter, so that kind of a think alike thing. And it's not a process where you're going to be handed 4 candidates and then you decide which of the 4. It's going to be more a process of you're finding the perfect person, the person that is uniquely at a point in their life where their goal in life is exactly what we want as a superintendent. And so how long does it take? It takes as long as it takes to find that person. So I think we're all in agreement that we need to start soon. Selecting who does that. I went with a person that was in Georgia. Okay, had to fly out here and whatever. I don't know how I got connected with Kathy Montgomery, but she did traveled and went to things and whatever, and came up with really candidates that if it were up to me, I would not have hired them, honestly, if I went on my experience and what I did. But she knew better what was needed than what I knew. I stated what the goal was, and she could just see. Somebody can come into our district because we don't need to really tell them the goals. And we've had a parent survey in $5,000 survey, a while ago. You could give the same survey now. It's going to come out the same with parents. I mean, they're really interested in a good education for their kids, and everything else is kind of down the list. So that's our main thing, because all of the things follow. I mean, you're going to have discipline go away. You're going to have all these other problems are going to cure themselves when you really get on track with the school. So the process is going to be actually kind of really are setting the goals. I think the goals we already have from a parent survey. Pretty much. I don't think we need to go. It's not rocket science. We have to go out and find out whether parents want their kids educated or not. The answer is yes. And but we need to agree on what those goals are. And then we're going to get somebody that's going to go out there and find a person that's done it. They've already done it. They've taken a school district and they've taken it from mediocre to top notch in a reasonably short period of time, and they're bored because to them the excitement was making it grow, and they want to try a challenge somewhere else. You're not going to find that person around. You're not going to find a big list of that person, but there is somebody out there. There are probably several, and you got to, we need to court them. It's not just like they're in the unemployment line looking for a job either, and we're going to get them to come over here and do their magic. And so that, I think, is the process. It's not really a lot of our input other than having the goals and finding the right person. If the right person isn't doing anything, they'll come back and tell you, I can't do this, and you get someone else.
Thank you, Board Member Honak. I just want to make a clarifying point there. We will not be hiring someone based on our goals. We'll be hiring someone based on the job description and their experience and qualifications to fulfill the job description. And that's what I would like to see brought back to the December meeting, is the job description for some board input on that. Board Members Idema?
I just wanted to say I liked Dr. Dowling's idea that we go out for an RFP in addition to looking at the list, because I do think that that just leaves us all options on the table, and we're not waiting for us to possibly have to do that if we don't like any of these options that we have already. So
Can we?
I agree with that and Dowling, but
Or-
you can't hire based on,
Excuse me, Board Member Honak? Can we bring that RFP to the December meeting, or do we need to have a specific discussion on what the RFP should contain prior to approving that?
if I can just comment, you
Director Vaughn.
can't say there's a job description
Board Member
and
Honak,
that's what
you
we're
do not have the
hiring on.
floor. Board
Okay,
Member
well,
Honak,
tell me when I can
you
have the floor and I'll wait.
I will let you have the floor when we complete this portion of the discussion. Executive Director Vaughn.
We certainly could bring the approval to release an RFP. I do think there needs to be some of that discussion for us to actually write the RFP. Because as has been shared tonight, I mean, this isn't a normal type of purchase. The purchasing team certainly could look at what factors typically are included in these RFPs. But I do think it would be beneficial to have some of that feedback incorporated into the RFP. I will say sometimes it can be tricky to release an RFP if you're not sure that you're going to use it. That's typically frowned upon in the purchasing community. I don't know if it's technically against any rules, but I do know that typically speaking, that's not done. But I can certainly discuss that with my purchasing director and legal counsel to see if that's a viable option.
Ms. McLennan.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Mr. Vaughn, I do think he's correct that it is atypical to use both a consulting or a cooperative contract and an RFP. An RFP is time consuming and takes more of the resources of the district. My suggestion, humble suggestion, would be to allow Executive Director Vaughn to produce to you the search firms that would be able to be procured through the cooperative contracts. And if you are dissatisfied with that resource, then you would then issue the RFP. And because you've got the time frame involved, you do have plenty of time.
Well, I guess I would disagree on the time frame involved with having plenty of time, because in my mind, we're hitting the ground running with an open position in January. So if we can't get the yay or nay on the co-op agreement and then get an RFP happening and all of that, that's putting us, our next meeting is mid-December. We don't have a meeting at the end of December. So if we can't get something in process in December, we're looking at January to even get the job posting out there.
So we do have a special meeting in December after our regular meeting, which is
your
my
evaluation? Yes.
which is a special meeting. So I guess my question would be, I would think that we would be able to, like, if you didn't find a firm in the typical regular meeting, we could then bring back the criteria at that meeting, and then they could move forward with the RFP.
Okay, so you're proposing that we would discuss the co-op options on the 13th, and then we would, if we are unhappy with that, we on the 15th could approve the RFP to go forward.
Correct.
Okay, how does the rest of the board feel about that?
I think that works. I mean, I agree. I don't like the idea of putting an RFP out without specific knowledge of us wanting to use it. It's one thing if we don't find something that we want, but just doing it to make other people do work. I agree that doesn't feel professional. And I think, we're talking about 2 days' time from the meeting to that. I forgot those meetings were actually in the same week. So Director Vaughn, if it is possible to put together even a template, let's say, of an RFP from the meeting from Tuesday until the meeting on Thursday, then we have the conversation on Thursday to say, okay, here's what we want changed in the RFP on Thursday, then that would give you, but you would have to come back with some sort of template or something for us to start with, because I don't know if in the meeting on Thursday, the whole, the board could come to a, conversation about the RFP from scratch. So is there some sort of template or first draft that you could do based on what's been done in the past, and then we could add specific criteria to that?
The purchasing team certainly could look at RFPs that are publicly available for similar purchases and
Okay.
start drafting that. My concern on the timeline with those meetings being so close together would actually be the 24-hour posting requirement under open meeting law. We would have incredibly little time to make any revisions between the two meetings on that draft template.
Madam President, members of the governing board, Ms. Potopath has pointed out that you all have a 48-hour timeframe now for the publishing of agendas prior to a board meeting by board policy. Is that correct? So, so that makes it even tighter. One option might be for you all to have your office look at the cooperative contracts, recommend search firms, allow you to have that discussion, and then have an alternative action item later in the board meeting to issue the RFP on the 13th if you're dissatisfied with the cooperative. So you could have an either or.
Okay, so you're suggesting that we would, earlier in the meeting on the 13th, discuss the co-op options. If we're not happy with that, later on the agenda, we would have a draft of the RFP that we could then approve if that was where we wanted to go with that.
That would be another way to do it. That does potentially create some unnecessary work for your business office, but it would be one way to do it.
I think we could wait. I think we can do that. Let's look at the list that they give us and then I don't want to make them go through a lot of work for this RFP if we're not going to follow through on it. It seems like that is going to be a lot of work. So I think you could probably wait till the January meeting.
And the other option too is that we could also plan another additional special meeting. It could be virtual, where that's the only action item.
Yeah, like the last week in December before the break. Okay, I guess that could be our last kind of resort on that. Board Member Honak, you've had comments?
Yeah, I just think that to say that we're hiring a job description is very limiting. And, we need to do better than that. If it's just a job description, it's saying that there's, a jillion people that would, any one of them to qualify. And we really think, I think that our sights are going to should be set really high. And you're going to need a unique person. So it's beyond a job description. Hiring on a job description works for, it's a manager for McDonald's, but not for what we need here.
Dr. Dowling, do you have an additional comment?
Yeah, yes, clarification. There's nothing to prevent the search firms on the co-op contract from submitting an RFP if we decide to go that route.
That'd be correct.
Okay. And then the only thing we're saying is that in that meeting, we're just saying we may not be happy with the co-op search firms that we see. And so we're just giving authorization to the superintendent to go out and create an RFP. Is that correct?
That is typically how that works, yes.
Yeah.
Director Vaughn, can you clarify the time frame we'd be looking at if we, let's say, the last week in December before the break, decided that we needed to go the RFP route? What is the time frame we're looking at for your team to develop that for us to give you the criteria for it to go out. How long do people have to respond? Typically, I know we can create that on
It-
our own, but I mean,
yeah.
what is the typical timeframe we'd be looking at?
It can vary a lot, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, which is why the cooperative contract route is significantly more expeditious.
3 months from the development to the selection?
If the timeline is rushed. Yeah.
But I mean, that's what you're saying, that the whole thing sort of soup to nuts is that 3 to 6 months timeline. Okay.
Is that even with the co-op? You're saying
No, with a co-op, that's the benefit. You can
you
immediately,
eliminate the RFP process?
correct.
Well, the question would be, is there any way for the board to see who's on the co-op contract?
Yes,
I mean, like
so
tomorrow. Next day?
tomorrow may be challenging, but quickly.
I'd just be interested to see who's on there, to be honest with you.
I'll certainly direct our director of purchasing to begin working on that tomorrow.
Well, let's do it tomorrow. Thursday morning would be fine. No, I'm just joking.
I know you are.
Okay. So I think we have our next action steps, which will happen at the December meeting. Is there anything else that you need Superintendent Gunning our direction on at this point?
I do not think so. So to sum it up, we'll bring back the job description or possibly several for like a planning position as well as a superintendent job description with recommended possible changes based on the addition of staff. We'll also bring back the folks from the co-op, making sure that you guys have those search firms to be able to review. And then just to clarify, did we say that we would add it to the agenda item later in the agenda in this at the December 13th meeting to just approve to go out for the RFP? Not that it would.
I think that's our most expedient way to do it.
Okay, so then we'll do that as well. Of course, we would skip that item if you select one of the firms earlier in the night.
Okay, any other board member comments on this section before we proceed? All right, on to employee benefits.
Hello again, President Moran and members of the governing board. Again, I am filling in for my director. Director Reichs is out ill. And so we wanted to present some information on our employee benefits for the next year, 23-24. Oh, it was already done. Sorry. So this slide highlights our current medical plan enrollees. We wanted to show the enrollment broken down by classified and certified. We are also showing the average hourly rate for each type of enrollment. A couple of things to make note of is that very few employees do elect coverage for their families. This is likely due to the high cost of the premiums. Employee only is our largest class of enrollments. The district provides this at no cost to the employee, which is the HDHP and the co-pay gold plans. And as you can see, 76 classified employment or employees enrolled in the employee only medical make less than $16 an hour. And so this slide is basically the exact same thing, only it's just our dental program. And again, it's separated from classified to certified. And we also noted the average hourly rate for each of the categories.
And just a clarifying question, the dental is not paid by the district, correct? That's paid by the employee?
It is paid by the district for full-time employees.
Okay, so medical and dental.
Mhm.
Okay.
Can you clarify how many total classified employees we have and total certified employees, whether they receive, now they must be, I mean, they can receive benefits, whether they do or not, doesn't matter, but like how many total do we have in the district?
Anybody know that number? Is that something that we can get back? Okay. I do.
I mean,
not,
I'm
but
just
I will get
wondering,
back
you
to
know, it's, here we say 273 are taking benefits. Is that half of our classified staff? Is that a quarter? Is that all of them? I mean, like what, how many approximately, you know, classified staff do we have? I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how many people we are currently offering benefits to.
I would say that's close to half of our classified staff, but it's not the total number of classified staff that's eligible for medical and dental.
Okay.
That would be the number that I would, is that the number you would prefer, the ones that are eligible?
Correct.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
All right. So then, so our renewal with the ASBATE has a cap of a 10% increase, and this would be our worst case scenario. So we're really hoping that it does not end up at the 10%. We do have a pre-renewal meeting with ASBATE in early January, and that's going to give us an idea of which direction we're heading, whether it's going to be closer to the 10 or whatever it may be. And we do expect that the renewals will come in March. So we would like to consider some options for keeping our insurance costs low for our employees for the districts. This process might include surveying the employees. One, their satisfaction with the plans and the tolerance for possible plan changes. Two, an interest level in the HDHP plan, which is the lowest cost plan. And then three, would there be a willingness to share the premium cost? So basically, would the employee be willing to take on some of the cost for the increase?
We've had this discussion before, and I think undoubtedly the answer to that question is going to be no, we don't want to share in the premium. So I don't really see the purpose of that question. Tell me more about why we would ask that question.
Well, because the other option would be, I believe I was talking to Executive Director Vaughn about this. I believe that one of the other options would be to compensate in the way of base raises. So it would either be, if I'm misspeaking, please stop me.
No, so the idea is it's all the same money, right? It either goes to covering cost of increased benefit costs, or it goes to salary increases or other programs. I mean, it doesn't have to be in salary and benefits, but if you're looking at what you're going to do for as far as a compensation program for a coming year, it's either going to be in base salary or it's going to be in benefits. And so the question, I think, is what, which to Dr. Dowling's point earlier, it's a hard question to ask well, but where do our employees land on, would they prefer to see a higher base salary, or would they prefer to not share benefit costs? To your point, if you just ask, do you want to share benefit costs, the answer will be no. But I think there may be a little bit more interesting data if you start getting into the either or scenario.
Well, I think the answer to that would be, if I am one of the 445 employees who receive my entire premium paid for, I'm going to have one answer. But if I have coverage through my spouse's plan, you're going to have a different answer there. So again, I'm just not really sure what kind of useful data we're getting there. I think this is really more of a high level board decision. Not that we don't want feedback on that, but to Executive Director Vaughn's point, this comes down to the dollars and cents. It's either going to come in their salaries, or we're going to continue to pay these premiums that not all of our employees benefit from. So I've been saying this for years, but based on this information, not knowing what that increase is going to be, I think we need to take a serious look at pushing the cost of both our dental, a portion of the cost of both our dental and our medical to our employees, which is what the vast majority of employees across various industries already do. The costs are becoming overwhelming. $680,000 increase, which is, again, worst case scenario. I understand that. But that's really hard for me to swallow. I would like to open the floor to additional board member feedback.
Yeah, we had the same conversation last year when our prices, I think, went over the $7,000 mark or $7,200 mark. I can't remember what it was. And we basically, for the last 2 years have been saying, well, next year we're going to make the hard choice and next year we're going to make the hard choice. And it is a really hard choice because this is an amazing benefit that we can give to our employees. And for some, especially our classified staff, who I know they did receive a nice pay bump based on our budget last year, don't make enough. And so this is a huge, chunk of their paycheck that would be going to that. So that is not lost on me at all. However, I look at $680,000 in increase and I see, that's why I'm asking in terms of how many employees is actually are taking advantage of this. Everyone isn't enjoying that same benefit. And if we continue to pay that, and it will, it's not a question of if, it's when it will affect people's base raises, because it will. We can't do both. We don't have the money to do both. And so if I'm one of the 400 people that get benefits, to Kim's point, I have one answer. If I don't, I have another answer. And so I think we need to look purely at the dollars and cents and say, we can afford to provide everyone base raises at this amount. And that's what we should be doing because everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves merit increases based on, cost of living and merit increases based on their observations and assessments. And then if we have enough money, right, in sort of the big bucket, we can say, okay, benefits, we can pay up to $7,000. Anything over and above that, whether it's dental, vision, medical, whatever it is, the employee is responsible for that. Because, I think because we have such amazing benefits, I promise that there are some of the 273 classified and 359 certified or whatever, or 445, excuse me, that take our benefits because they're free. They can get them cheaper, right, than what we would be charging them if they go with their spouse's plan. So we may have some adjustment because they're going to say, well, gosh, if it's going to cost me a couple $1,000s at Litchfield, it's only going to cost me X over here. We might have some adjustment there so that they can make the best decision for their family and pay less, which is ultimately what I want them to do, right? I want them to have the best benefits and pay the least amount for it. So I think we need to figure out, or maybe Director Bond needs to figure out what that number is. We want the base rate, the base pay increase to be X because we want that number to be as high as possible because it affects everyone. Then we say we can afford up to this point, whether it's $7,000 or $6,000 or whatever. And then we sort of participate in some sort of percentage split with all employees that elect to have benefits is how I'd like to see this play out.
I've got a question that Michael, it's a very good analogy is this is zero-based budget. Here's the pot in the middle of the table. You decide how you want to divide it up. What I find interesting when looking at this yesterday, but the medical and the dental is employee only is paid for by the district, correct? Both of them. I just, for the life of me, I can't figure out why certified 445 are taking the medical, but 359 took advantage of the dental. That's almost, that's 86. People didn't do that. I mean, why in the heck? If it was free, why wouldn't you do it? I know my wife's got her dental and I'm secondary on hers, and on mine, I'm primary, she's secondary on mine. So we're covered. It saves us a lot of money on dental. Just interesting. Looks like some people don't care. That would lead me to believe they want money in their paycheck via a salary increase versus the cost of the medical and dental. Just a point.
If I can step out of my role for a second and just provide some personal information. As an employee who declined both medical and dental, and I'm just getting it through my spouse. So dental, as an example, we were much more interested in the network that was provided by my wife's because we have a dentist we very much enjoy going to. And medical, I the rules are complicated around which plan becomes primary and which plan becomes secondary. And we just didn't want to deal with that complexity, but that's just a personal
Board members, Idema, do you have any, oh, sorry. Board members, Idema, do you have any comments on this?
So if I'm remembering correctly, last year when we were talking about benefits, it was like almost $8,000. We were getting pretty close to $8,000, if I remember correctly, but I don't remember if that was just health insurance or if that was the total like dental and medical. Regardless, we're getting close to $8,000. So I think that we can't not have this conversation anymore. I think we do have to pick a number because to everyone's point, not everybody is using these benefits, but everybody gets the pay increases that we do. And so I know that this could be challenging for some people who really rely on having all of it covered, but at the end of the day, we're giving them almost $8,000 in addition to their salary. So it's not that I necessarily want to see that potentially go down, but I might say I don't want to spend any more than we're spending right now.
So we're currently spending 7,356. So, and something that's probably a good idea to pull up prior going into the budget timeframe is under our human resource department, the employee benefits, you can see the exact cost that's being passed on for each plan, as well as when they add a spouse or a child or that type of thing to each of the plans. Then you can see the dollar amount. But that cost was determined for those higher end plans. And then the HDHP that Sarah mentioned earlier, that is 5,850 is what we pay for as an employer.
How it was structured historically, to my understanding, is no matter which tier plan or coverage that the employee provided, the district was paying the same amount. So the district was not covering any additional if you elected to cover your child or spouse or family, which is why those coverages are so expensive, because currently we're passing on all of that additional cost to those who choose to elect it. So effectively, the cost that the district is paying has historically been set at whatever that cost of just covering the employee is, if that makes sense.
With the exception of, and correct me if I'm wrong here, for the high deductible health insurance plan, we make up the difference with the contribution to their HSA, correct?
Correct. So it looks a little bit different, but the total cost to the district is effectively the same dollar amount.
Yes.
Okay, so just make sure I understand. We are paying $73.56, whether they're on that high deductible plan or not, because we're putting the rest of it from that 5,300 into a, okay. And just for clarification, there's lots of companies that pass on that extra cost for family. I mean, I'm a stay-at-home mom.
Well, I'm
My
not
husband-
saying it's
So yeah, like, so
unusual.
that's totally common. So I mean, I know that's an expensive thing as a stay-at-home mom who has a husband that provides our insurance. I know what that's like, and it can be challenging. I get it. But again, I think we have to pick a number and kind of just say that's our number. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, and why we wanted to give you all of these numbers is so that when you look at that, you can see exactly the direct impact, especially with our hourly employees. A lot of them are probably not taking home any dollar amount on their weekly basis because it's all going, or the majority of it's going to their benefits package, which is fine. But we just want to make sure you have a full picture of when you go into that budget season of really looking at the overall impact.
Yeah, I mean, the other number I want to throw out there is, if we're looking at 7,300 per employee and we have a 10% increase, that's going to put us at over $8,000. So even if we wanted to split that at 5 and 5, we absorb 5, they absorb 5%, that's still a massive amount. So that's going to be a challenging conversation when we get more information and are really looking at all of our options for the budget.
Yeah, and I think, I think we just need to be really careful here because I'm sure that I knew that information, but I didn't remember it in terms of us sort of allowing people to take the difference in the lower plan and the higher plan and just giving that to them in their HSA. We're not doing that for employees that aren't taking benefits. So that concerns me a little bit, that we're providing an added benefit to one employee group that we're not doing to others. So that, like I said, I'm sure that I knew that before, but I'm just hearing that in a different way now. So yeah, I think that we need to come up with some sort of percentage split. And I don't even know that it is, I'm just using the 10%. I know that's worst case scenario, but if it is 10% splitting the 5 and 5, I think that we should go to a base amount. We're going to pay $7,000 from now till whenever. And every increase that comes, that will be on the employee and, or, if our budget situation changes. I'm not sure that at this point we can even stomach taking on more, because I think that's going to put less emphasis on any type of salary increase we would be able to do for all employees, but specifically the ones that don't take benefits. That's concerning to me that we're compensating that way. So yeah, I would be interested to see what you would determine that figure to be roughly. So thank you.
Board Member Honak, do you have any feedback on the benefits discussion?
Yes, thank you. I mean, this is very tough and it's very personal and it's very important to a lot of people in different ways. My comment is that we want to be humane and we want to take care of our employees, but in the end, when we revise our salaries, it really boils down to what's competitive. We have the same types of expenses of every other school, and we want to attract the best talent that we can. And so what is competitive? So, I mean, I don't have any specific suggestions, but if we're really lost, then I think that maybe we either go back to what we were told. I don't remember, within the last year, I thought we went through all this a little bit, and just make sure that what we're doing is going to keep and attract the people we want. Thank you.
I agree with Board Member Honak in that when it comes time to take action on this decision, I would like to see what our competing districts are doing. If they're offering fully paid benefits, and if so, how much those are costing, whatever information we can get on that in order to remain competitive. As we know, our average teacher salary is higher than the average in Arizona, and maybe looking at those two things in tandem, the salary piece and the benefits piece, to try to strike a balance between those two based on our primary competitors, whoever that might be.
Can I ask a clarifying question to
Yes.
see if I understand? So what I hear you asking for is basically an analysis of peers on a total compensation. So what we're paying compared to the peers and what we're giving in a benefits package.
Yes, and the reason I think that would be useful is we see the salary information, but that's not a comprehensive picture. And so I think we are not only above average in our salary, but also the total compensation. But the total compensation is not a number that we have touted. And I think we should, because not only are the benefits, the medical benefits and dental benefits that we provide, I think above average, but also the amount of money that we put into retirement, we don't talk about that enough, in my opinion. So yeah, I would love to see total compensation, and I'd love to see our employees get an education on what that number actually is.
Thank you for talking about the retirement. That is very frequently an underappreciated portion of compensation, especially for those of our employees who don't necessarily need to work in education and wouldn't be getting that benefit regardless of where they ended up working. So thank you.
Any other board member comments
If I,
on benefits?
if I may just make one more point, just
Yes.
for processing purposes, Executive Director DeHost just pointed out that the Dr. Dowling had mentioned about the dental and certified. So the numbers are actually the same number of employees. It's just that more of our employees added family, spouse, all of that. So it's actually the same number of people, which I'm one of them.
So they maybe only had themselves for medical, but they added a child or a spouse for dental because maybe we just have amazing dental benefits or something. Okay.
We do have amazing dental benefits, and it was a very small premium to pay.
Right. So that you could add other people. Okay. That makes sense.
Any other clarifying questions, Superintendent Gunning, on the benefits section? Okay, then we can move on to the compensation planning timeline.
All right, so this is a high-level timeline of what administration is expecting the budget process to look like for this coming year. So very shortly, at the December 13th meeting, I was anticipating bringing back the long-range forecasts that we have been discussing recently. I think, not to show my cards, but I think what you see there will play directly into the benefits conversation we had tonight. And I suspect at that point, the benefits conversation will become more clear. Then in January, we are hoping to bring back both discussion and potential approval for class size recommendations for the next school year. The reason it's very important to have that set so early in the budget process is it truly is one of your biggest levers on your budget, because it directly drives how many teachers you need, and that's a very large expense when it comes to the overall budget. Then in January or potentially February, we'll bring back work calendars for approval. So what work needs to be done on that prior to those discussions is meeting with departments and in some instances schools to determine if there are any requested changes. For example, if there's a position that we've had be a 12-month that for whatever reason we don't think needs to be, or vice versa, any work calendar changes like that, we would bring in January, which again is important to bring early, because if we're changing the number of days or the number of hours we're compensating employees, that's an additional way of, you may see additional compensation and therefore additional costs. And then in January, we will also be bringing the employment contracts and work agreement language for approval. And then we are hoping to have Jeremy, what's Jeremy's last name? Thank you. Jeremy Calles, from the firm that's been working with the district on compensation studies, provide an updated recommendation and discussion in January or February, depending on timeline of working with him and identifying information. Presently, he is working on updating the recommendations, and the reason that's important is because the governing board was able to approve raises and changes in compensation that were outside of the original plan. And so it's important to take a look at what was originally recommended and what our surrounding districts have also done to see if what the initial next steps are still the best next steps for the district, if that makes sense. And then in February, we'll have the benefits renewal presentation and the renewals. In March, we'll have the benefits for approval. And then we'll bring the projected budget, which will then feed into the proposed budget in March.
So we will issue contracts without specific dollar amounts, similar to what we did this year. How did that work? Was that a successful process?
It was. We had a few emails that came through because we had not done that before in the past, but a lot of certified staff that have worked in other districts are very used and comfortable with that process. It was very, very helpful for us for job fairs because we knew exactly by the end of February how many openings we had and what we needed to fill. So it was highly effective from a recruitment perspective rather than guessing and then losing candidates because another district snags them because we're waiting to see exactly how many openings we have.
Do you think that that had any effect on our increase in contract release request? That is one area that we saw go up fairly significantly is people asked to be released basically prior to, the summer months or before they even started. Do you think that that had any effect on it whatsoever?
I do not think so. I think COVID and the effects of the pandemic is where we're seeing the impact on contract release.
Okay.
And it's across every district. So it's not something that's just unique to Litchfield. Actually, we're faring a lot better than most districts.
And when you say COVID, I mean, coming into this school year, we didn't have any, sort of, circumstances in terms of,
Right.
changing of schedule or online learning or masks or anything like that. So what do you mean when you say
I think the
COVID?
after effects of the impact of the pandemic on their
Okay.
well-being.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
I guess one piece of feedback is on this planning timeline, it has the compensation study presentation for either, correct me if I'm wrong here, for either January or February, depending on when that's ready. I would highly encourage us to have that conversation sooner rather than later, because I think we might need more than one conversation. I don't know that it's difficult when we get the information potentially 48 hours in advance to then be able to really digest and make a decision on that information, especially when it comes to something as important as compensation, because I have a feeling we're going to have some pretty big shifts in certain areas. I know IT is one area that we've talked about and getting more competitive there. So I'd like us to be able to have the opportunity for more discussions around that before we have to actually be locked into the proposed budget, if possible. Board Member Zeidemeyer, do you have any feedback on this timeline?
No, other than I would agree that we should have that compensation study conversation soon so that we can really know all the information and make informed decisions.
Dr. Dowling?
No, I haven't got any comment.
Board Member Honak?
I don't really have any input. Thank you.
Anything else, Board Member Clymer?
No, thank you.
Any other clarifying questions, Superintendent Gunning or from the administration? All right, then that brings us to agenda item 2A.
I motion to adjourn.
I will second. Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.